I want you to understand who my wife is before I tell you what happened to her. She is the kind of woman who remembers your coffee order after meeting you once. Who sends a card, a real card, stamped and handwritten, when someone in your family passes. Who has never, not once in 31 years of marriage, left a dish in the sink overnight. She grew up in a small house in rural Kentucky with parents who believed that hospitality wasn't a gesture, it was a character trait. You fed people, you showed up, you didn't keep score. Her name is Patrice, and I want you to hold on to that, who she is, because what I'm about to tell you only makes sense if you know her first. Our son, Owen, our only child, married a woman named Alexis about 4 years ago. Alexis grew up in Scottsdale. Her parents had a housekeeper and a personal chef through most of her childhood. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I think it explains certain things. Certain assumptions she carried into adulthood without ever realizing she carried them. In the beginning, we got along fine. More than fine, actually. There was a dinner at their apartment the first Christmas they were together, and Patrice brought her grandmother's pecan pie, and Alexis ate 3 slices and told her it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. I believed her. I still believe she meant it. That part was real. But something shifted after the wedding. It's hard to name exactly when. It wasn't one moment. It was more like a slow leak. The kind you don't notice until the ceiling starts to bow. Alexis began hosting. Aggressively, she loved having people over, which is fine, admirable even. But somewhere along the way, having people over became a production, a performance. Everything had to be Pinterest-worthy, Instagram-ready, the kind of dinner party that looks effortless because someone else did all the effort. That someone, it turned out, was Patrice. It started small. Could Patrice bring her potato salad to the 4th of July cookout? Of course. Could she make 2 batches of her cornbread for the Labor Day gathering? Sure. Would she mind picking up the desserts for Owen's birthday dinner? Not just baking them, but sourcing everything from scratch? Patrice did it without complaint because that's who she is. I watched it happen. I watched the requests get bigger. I watched Alexis accept Patrice's contributions the way you accept something you're owed, with a quick nod, maybe a thanks, and then moving on. No asking if it was too much. No offering to split the cost of ingredients. No, let me at least pay you back for the groceries. I said something to Owen once. About 2 years in, after Patrice had spent an entire Saturday making 3 different casseroles for a dinner party we weren't even attending, I said, "Son, your wife keeps asking your mother to do a lot of heavy lifting for these events." He looked at me with that face, the one that means he heard me but isn't going to do anything about it, and said, "Mom loves to cook, Dad. She told me herself." And he was right. Patrice does love to cook, but love of cooking is not the same as consent to being used as an unpaid caterer. I let it go. That was my mistake. Last Easter, Alexis called Patrice on a Tuesday, 10 days before Easter Sunday, and told her she was hosting 40 people. 40. Her parents, her sister's family, several of Owen's work colleagues, a handful of people from her book club. She had a vision for the menu. She rattled it off like she was placing an order at a restaurant. Honey glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, deviled eggs, 2 dozen at least, a pasta salad, dinner rolls homemade, 2 pies, a carrot cake. "I figured you could handle most of this," Alexis said to Patrice, "since you're so good at it." Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said she'd think about it. She came and found me in the garage afterward. I was refinishing a rocking chair, one of those slow weekend projects I'd been putting off for years. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded, and that look she gets when she's turning something over in her mind. "She wants me to cook Easter for 40 people, she said. I put down the sandpaper. "By yourself?" She mentioned Gina might do the salad. Gina is Alexis's sister, who to my knowledge has never made anything more complicated than a charcuterie board. "And the groceries?" Patrice smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "She didn't mention that part. I'm 61 years old. I spent 34 years in commercial insurance, worked my way up to regional director, retired 2 years ago. I know how to read a contract. I know when the terms are unreasonable, and I know when someone is too polite to say so." I asked Patrice what she wanted to do. Not what was easiest, not what would avoid conflict, what she actually wanted. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to not do it." "Then we don't do it," I said. She looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. "Pat," I said, "you don't have to do this. But Owen is a grown man who married a woman who thinks you're a restaurant." She laughed at that, a real one. And then her eyes went a little watery, and she looked out at the backyard, where the oak tree we planted the year Owen was born was just starting to bud out for spring. She said, "I just don't want to make things hard." "You're not making anything hard," I said. "You're just declining to do something unreasonable." That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had a plan. I didn't call Owen first. That was intentional. In the past, whenever there was friction with Alexis, I'd loop in Owen, and it would become this whole mediation process where Patrice ended up apologizing for having feelings. I was done with that cycle. Instead, I got on the computer that Thursday night after Patrice went to bed, and I booked us a long weekend in Savannah, Georgia. We'd talked about going for years. Patrice loves old architecture, history, the kind of city you can walk through and feel the weight of time. I found a small inn on a quiet street in the historic district, a place with a porch and rocking chairs, and a breakfast that someone else would cook for us for once. I booked it for Easter weekend. Departure Good Friday morning. Return Monday evening. Then I sat back in my chair and I thought about it for a long minute, not second-guessing, just thinking. Patrice had given 40 years. 40 to being the kind of woman who shows up. For her parents before they passed, for the neighbors, for every school bake sale and church potluck and bereavement meal. She had never once, not once, put herself first and called it a decision instead of a failure. I wasn't going to let her do that this time. Friday morning, I told her over coffee. I slid the printed confirmation across the kitchen table. She looked at it, looked up at me, back down at it. "You already booked it," she said. "I already booked it. For Easter weekend." For Easter weekend. She pressed her lips together. I could see her working through it, the guilt, the habit, the 30 years of, "But what will people think?" Then she looked out the window for a moment, the oak tree again, and then she looked back at me and said, "Okay, just okay." But it was the most solid word I'd heard her say in years. We called Owen that Saturday morning. Together, Patrice held the phone and I sat beside her. She told him calmly, no drama, no lengthy explanation, that we wouldn't be available for Easter this year, that we'd made other plans, that we hoped they had a wonderful celebration. Owen's response was a pause. "Then what other plans? We're going to Savannah," Patrice said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Does Alexis know?" "We're telling you now," I said, "so you can let her know." There was a quality to the silence on his end that I recognized. It's the same silence he had at 16 when we told him he couldn't take the car out, on a night we knew was risky, processing, recalibrating, trying to figure out whether to push back. He didn't push back, he said okay. He said to have a good trip. He said he'd figure out Easter. What he did next, I found out about it sideways 2 days later, when Patrice mentioned almost in passing that Alexis had texted her. The text said, "I was really counting on you for this. There's no way I can pull this together without your help. I thought we were family." Patrice showed me the phone. She didn't say anything, just handed it to me. I read it twice, then I handed it back. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She took the phone, set it face down on the counter, and walked back to the laundry she'd been folding. That was her answer. We drove to Savannah on Good Friday. The forecast had threatened rain all week, but the morning was clear. That particular pale blue sky you only get in early spring, before the heat sets in. We had the windows down for the first hour through the Piedmont, coffee in the cup holder, radio on low. Patrice had her feet up on the dashboard the way she used to when we were first married, before she decided she was too old for it. Turns out she wasn't too old for it. I didn't bring up Owen or Alexis once during that drive. She didn't either. There was nothing to say that the road wasn't already saying. The inn was everything the pictures promised. Old brick, wide plank floors, a 4-poster bed with actual good pillows. The host, a man named Warren, who'd been running the place with his husband for 15 years, handed us a glass of sweet tea the moment we walked in, and told us the kitchen made biscuits fresh every morning at 7, and if we wanted the mushroom grits, we should put our name in by 6:30. Patrice got the mushroom grits every single morning. We walked the squares, sat on benches, and watched the Spanish moss move. Found a little bookshop on a side street, where Patrice spent 45 minutes and left with 3 novels. We had dinner one night at a restaurant on the river, where the food took its time getting to us, and neither of us minded. We talked about things we hadn't talked about in a long while, places we still wanted to see, whether to finally get a dog, what we'd do with the back bedroom now that it had been a guest room for 20 years with almost no guests. Easter Sunday morning, we sat on the porch of the inn with coffee and the biscuits Warren had mentioned and a copy of the Savannah paper. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, church bells were ringing. It was 64 degrees and not a cloud anywhere. My phone rang at 4:17 in the afternoon. It was Alexis. I looked at the screen. Patrice was beside me, reading her novel. I showed her the name. She glanced at it, then back at her book. "Up to you," she said. I let it go to voicemail. She called back 6 minutes later. Then Owen called, then Alexis again. I turned the phone over and put it in my shirt pocket. We were at a restaurant by then. A quiet place recommended by Warren, the kind of spot that does a proper Sunday roast and doesn't rush you. We had a table by the window. Outside, Savannah was doing what it does on a Sunday, slow and golden and unhurried. Patrice had ordered the roasted chicken. I had the pork. We had split a bottle of wine that the server said came from a small vineyard in the North Georgia mountains, which neither of us had ever heard of, and which was excellent. My phone buzzed in my pocket 3 more times during dinner. I turned the volume all the way down. When we got back to the inn that evening, I listened to the voicemails. One from Alexis, voice tight, telling me that the ham had overcooked and the guests were asking where Patrice was, and it would have been really nice to have a heads up that this was happening. One from Owen, quieter, asking me to call him back when I could. I didn't call anyone back that night. I sat on the porch in the dark for a while, listening to the of the streets settling down for the evening. A distant car, a dog somewhere, the creak of the porch boards when the wind shifted. Patrice came out after a bit with 2 cups of decaf and sat in the other chair. We didn't talk about the voicemails. We talked about whether to take the walking tour of the old cemetery the next morning before we checked out, and whether the biscuits would hold up for the drive home if Warren let us take a few wrapped in foil. He did let us. They held up fine. On the drive back Monday, I finally said what I'd been turning over all weekend. "I should have done this sooner," I said. 2 years sooner, probably. Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We both should have. You were just being you," I said. "That's the problem," she said. Not sad, just clear. I kept being me and hoping it would eventually be enough. She looked out the window at the passing Georgia pines. "It was enough," she said. "That was never the issue. The issue was that some people mistake kindness for availability. I let that sit. It sat well." Owen called on Tuesday when we were back home. We talked for a long time, longer than we have in years, honestly. He wasn't angry, more sobered, I think. He admitted that he'd seen what was happening with Alexis and the hosting and his mother's role in it, and that he'd told himself it was fine because Patrice never complained. I told him that was exactly the problem, that Patrice not complaining was not the same as Patrice not minding. He said he understood. I don't know yet if he does, really does, the kind of understanding that changes behavior. That part remains to be seen. Alexis has not called Patrice since that Sunday. We haven't heard whether Easter dinner was salvageable. We haven't asked. What I do know is this: Patrice slept better that weekend than she had in months. I could hear it, the deep, uninterrupted kind, no 3 a.m. trips to the kitchen because her mind wouldn't settle. She woke up Saturday morning and just stayed in bed for a while, not sleeping, just lying there. And when I asked what she was thinking, she said, "Nothing. Isn't that something?" It was something. I'm not interested in punishing our son. I'm not interested in a feud with his wife. I'm 61 years old, and I'm tired of stories that end with everyone circling each other for years over something that could have been resolved with a simple, clear, early no. What I am interested in is making sure Patrice never spends another Saturday driving across town with a car full of groceries she paid for, to cook a meal she wasn't asked to enjoy, for people who won't think to thank her. If that means Alexis has to figure out how to host her own events, so be it. There are caterers. There are Costco rotisserie chickens. There is a world full of options for a woman who wants to host 40 people for Easter and doesn't want to do the cooking. None of those options were ever my wife's problem to solve. We're going to Asheville in June. Patrice found a small place outside of town, up in the mountains, where you can hear the creak from the bedroom window. She booked it herself, which she's never done before. She called me into the kitchen to show me the confirmation on her laptop screen, and the way she looked when she said, "I put the deposit down," not asking permission, not checking whether it was okay. That look was worth more than I know how to say. Some lessons arrive late. That doesn't make them less true.